Thank you, everyone. This week's Crypto Journey, we have Jeremy Muir. Jeremy is a partner at MinterEllisonRuddWatts and is widely recognised as New Zealand's leading lawyer for cryptocurrencies, digital tokens and NFTs. As usual, we encourage interaction and questions throughout the session. Welcome, Jeremy. Thank you. We're all very excited for this week. It's going to be interesting to learn about crypto law.
Yeah, cool. It's great to be here.
Cool. Thank you.
Big fan.
Great. Thank you.
Shall I just kick off and talk a little bit about my journey, my crypto journey?
That would be wonderful to start. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll just stop you throughout with questions.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
So, I'm a lawyer. MinterEllisonRuddWatts is one of New Zealand's big sort of 3 or 4 commercial law firms. I've been there since I was a law clerk, apart from time spent overseas, where I worked in Guernsey in the Channel Islands and the Cayman Islands, where I basically started setting up offshore fund vehicles and offshore finance. Came back to New Zealand. We launched a specialist financial services practice around 2008 with my other partner here, Lloyd Kavanagh, who's a bit of a guru in sort of investment funds, AML and other things. And that practice sort of grew over time, where we do traditional stuff, if you like, so TradFi, setting up KiwiSaver schemes, but I've also done a lot of things like setting up venture capital funds, limited partnerships. And through that part of the business, I got quite involved in startups, acting for sort of FinTech businesses, so the intersection of financial services and technology. So that was people like early stages of equity crowdfunding, peer-to-peer lending, online platforms, businesses like Harmony and Squirrel and others. And then people like Sharesies. So Sharesies I've acted for since about day 3 or 4 in their incubator, where they kicked off, helping them through understanding the regulatory challenges with offering that kind of business online. So out of that sort of FinTech side, in 2017, we decided we'd have a look at cryptocurrencies. We didn't have any clients in the space at that time. We were just interested. So we looked at the law and we wrote a white paper to adopt the go native, if you like, called Tokens of Our Affection, where we looked at the universe of sort of coins and tokens that were floating around at that time and tested them against New Zealand's financial markets legislation. So were tokens and coins treated as regulated financial products? Which obviously had a big flow-on effect for businesses like yourselves. So if you are running a crypto exchange and the coins that you were listing were financial products, then you would need a certain kind of license, basically the license that NZX has, to be a financial products market. Whereas if the coins you list are not, then you don't need that kind of license. So we got quite into the detail of that. We did a seminar, actually about 2 days before we were due to give our seminar on it. Someone said, you should go and talk to this guy. So I went and talked to Fran Striner from Brave New Coin, Tekami Capital. Came out of that meeting sort of completely mind blown. Went down the rabbit hole, took the red pills, all of the above, shining eyes, and basically did that seminar. And since then we started to get very busy, kind of as one of the only shops in town that were really looking at this brave new world or otherwise. So we picked up some early clients like Fran and Tekami Capital and helped in the sort of the ICO boom and looking at things like security tokens and ideas, trying to find the next sort of horse to bet on in the race. We picked up Cryptopia as a client, which was the quite storied sort of New Zealand exchange pre-DASET or thereabouts early on. They got very big very early, and the time that they talked to us, they had over 2 million clients worldwide and listed around about 500 different coins of all sorts of quality. So we kept them, but at that stage, they'd never spoken to a lawyer. So they literally did not have terms and conditions or agreements on their website. It was all sort of run out of a garage or sort of growing out of that stage. So we kept them out of trouble with the FMA. We wrote terms and conditions that when they later, spoiler alert, got hacked and went bust, the liquidators went to court to determine whether the account holders were entitled to the remaining crypto that was left or the ordinary creditors. So that case was basically about the terms and conditions that we wrote, which said, of course the money and the crypto is held on trust for account holders, because we said that it was, and that had always been the intention, which was what was ultimately upheld by the courts here. So we did that. We acted for them. We've helped Stephen Dec out on, a few understanding some of the regulatory things around that. And then we've done lots of weird and wonderful things, acting for sort of overseas players with interests in New Zealand. We've helped a lot of the Centrality Futureverse companies as well around NFTs and other things. We've worked with Glorious Digital, which is the Dan Carter shareholder, also lots of other players, digital art business, using the sort of Centrality blockchain and other things, SensNet. We've done sort of digital ticketing through blockchain businesses. We've been pretty busy. And as part of that, so I went to Consensus, the new big blockchain global conference in 2018, which was one of the sort of pivotal conferences with the Lamborghinis parked outside in the middle of New York, and the final concert by Snoop Dogg, and which I didn't get to because I was somewhere else. But yeah, it's been an interesting and exciting ride. And I guess most recently, I've also had another role along with Alex Sims, who many in the space will have heard of, who's a blockchain academic at Auckland University. She and I were the two appointed independent advisors to the Parliamentary Finance and Expenditure Select Committee's inquiry into cryptocurrencies, which was sort of happened at the end of last year, start of this year. Lots of people submitted, lots of people made oral submissions as well. The politicians have been hopefully carefully considering those. So Alex and I wrote a sort of quite an extensive advisors report, which we submitted a couple of months ago, and we're kind of waiting for the next stage to come out of that, where the politicians and the officials will write their report, which goes on top of that, just looking at the overall issues around, is this good for New Zealand? Cryptocurrencies. We kind of widened it out to blockchain, tokens, Web3, all of those buzzwords, and the new digital business, and whether it should be regulated differently, more or less than it is. And when at some point, I'm very happy to talk a little bit about how New Zealand law works in this space and what are some of the key things to think about.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. That'd be great about, cryptocurrency law in New Zealand.
Yeah, and we also, clearly I'm a New Zealand lawyer, so what I'm talking about is the way New Zealand treats these things. But obviously there is a wider international context as well. Because the great thing about this technology is that it works to make things easier by removing intermediaries, by digitizing processes, by allowing for tokens and coins which can be programmable through the use of smart contracts and otherwise. The whole idea of this technology, in my mind, or at least there are two sort of key trends, one of which is digitization and disintermediation. So this is the technology that in the new digital world, where we interact with each other digitally in more and unique new ways, which feeds into sort of Web3, the metaverse, whether we're talking augmented reality or virtual reality, things are just going to start happening in a much more seamless sort of way, as in whether we're buying stuff, transferring value, moving between sort of worlds and digital environments. this is part of the technology that actually allows that to happen. So that's cool. And then the other key theme, of course, is decentralization, which is that this allows people to interact on a peer-to-peer basis in a much easier and freer way by interacting with digital protocols rather than going to a bank, instructing a bank to send money to another bank in order to buy a digital product, which is then transferred by another party after they've reviewed contracts and checked that money has moved from A to B to C. All of that will hopefully become a lot more seamless. So that's kind of the overall environment and what we're all sort of shooting for. And within that, of course, you then have the investment proposition of, are these tokens actually a valid an asset class that you can invest in to actually make money, hedge against risks in other parts of an investment portfolio. And I'm not here to give financial advice. And we'll talk about whether I actually could give regulated financial advice in this area at all. This is a whole nother
Jeremy, sorry to interrupt, but we have a question from Pete. Pete would like to know, in New Zealand, share investors are defined as either traders or investors. How does crypto stand in IRD's eyes in this respect?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to give you the caveat to start with, which is that I'm not a tax lawyer, but I know some good tax lawyers. They are just down the hallway, and we work closely with them on crypto stuff. Simon Okozu, Andrew Ryan are really well on top of this. So the key difference between, so this is my take, the key difference between buying and selling shares and buying and selling crypto, and let's say that we're talking about Bitcoin or a Bitcoin clone or Ethereum or something like that, because obviously crypto could be anything. We could have shares which are tokenized or otherwise, and so that's one point. The thing that the view that the IRD and many other jurisdictions takes in relation to crypto assets like Bitcoin is that you must be buying them with the intention of reselling them. So that means that when you resell it, the gain that you make will be treated as income, which is what we tax. So we don't have a capital gains tax in New Zealand, as everyone knows, but we do have income tax. And how the IRD and the government works and the legislation is that a lot of things that other people in other jurisdictions might tax as capital gains get taxed as income if you're caught under certain tests. So one of the ways you could be caught is if you're a trader, i.e. you're in the business of making investments and buying and selling shares, then when you make a profit, that's a profit of your business, therefore it's income, therefore we tax it. The distinction with shares otherwise is if you're not a trader, so you're just someone like me or you, if you're not a trader, who is just making an investment, then you're not, if you make a gain on that investment, then that's not income of your business, therefore it's not taxable. You could still be caught if you bought the shares with the intention of reselling them, because that's another way it could be treated as income, because that's kind of revenue account rather than capital account. Tax lawyers, accountants, shoot me if I'm getting this wrong, but that's kind of it. But the point with shares is that when you invest, you can plausibly say, I'm not buying this with the intention of ever reselling it. I may choose to at some later point, but I'm buying it because I want to invest in that company, and that company is going to pay me dividends over time. So that's why I'm doing it. And I may choose to sell it at some point, and if I do and I make a capital gain, then that won't be taxed. The problem that is that IRD doesn't allow you to sort of take that approach with crypto because you're never going to earn dividends. So if you hold a Bitcoin, kind of the only thing you can ever do with it is sell it. Now, but let's put DeFi to one side for a moment, and protocols that earn yield, come back to that. I don't know that IRD is necessarily caught up with that yet. But those are still also not rights that derive from the Bitcoin that you hold. So if you hold a Bitcoin, you must be intending to sell it at some point because that's all you can really do with it. So therefore, that's why all gains on those sort of crypto assets are taxable under our system, because you're bought with the intention of resale. So that's my non-tax lawyer's understanding of how the tax works.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions. So Jonathan would like to know, he's said, where does New Zealand stand in relation to Australia with progressing or enabling this industry? We're thinking for ourselves, or are we just going to cut and paste? Great question.
That is a great question.
Yeah.
Well, let me give the couple of cents worth of how we currently are, and then I'll come back to where we are versus Australia. So in New Zealand, most crypto assets, unless they are designed to operate like shares, or you can redeem them for cash or something like that, are not what we would call financial products. So that means that an exchange that offers a marketplace doesn't need a license. A company that offers tokens doesn't need a product disclosure statement, and other things follow from that as well. So, for example, our financial advice legislation doesn't capture advice given in relation to those sort of products, because advice given has to be given in relation to what's called a financial advice product in order to be captured as regulated advice, where someone needs a license or is caught by rules about what they can and can't say, needs to give you disclosure, all of that stuff. Financial advice products are the 4 classes of financial product under the Financial Markets Conduct Act, which is shares, debt securities, derivatives, or managed investment products like interest in a fund, plus 2 extras, which are consumer credit contracts, i.e. home mortgages, and insurance, which is why, mortgage brokers and insurance brokers get caught under those advice rules. So all of the way this industry is regulated in New Zealand is pretty much that if you fall outside that financial product definition, a lot of those rules don't apply. It's not to say it's not regulated at all, because if you're providing a service like a broking service or helping people buy crypto, or you're providing a market, then you're still providing a financial service, which is either you're issuing or managing a means of payment, or providing a money or a value transfer service, which is what DASET does, basically. And that means you need to be registered on the Financial Service Providers Register. You need to, and you're caught by the AML regime, which is why when you set up an account for Easy Crypto, DASET, one of these businesses, you'll have your identity verified, all of that. So that's kind of where we are. Australia, kind of similar, but they have tried to bring a few things into their licensing regimes. Australia has now come out today, the last day or so, with some more movement by the government saying these are the things that we're progressing on, but these are things which have already been signaled from. They had a select committee report about a year before us, and it said they would do things like license crypto exchanges, do a token mapping exercise where they looked at kind of the universe of these sort of products and put them into little boxes about how they should be regulated. And they may do other stuff as well. So we're a bit behind that, in that we haven't tried to move very quickly. And what I would say is that we live in almost a wait and see approach from our main regulator, the Financial Markets Authority. So they know they have some authority to step in and tell people to stop doing something they don't like, generally if you're being misleading or deceptive, but they don't really have the licensing regimes or otherwise to sort of actually regulate strongly exchanges or broking businesses or advice businesses. So Alex and I, as advisors to the Select Committee, have given them a report saying, here are some things that you might do. That's not public, so I can't tell you exactly what is in it yet, but some of the things that we're concerned about are balancing the need to drive innovation with the idea of sort of using a sledgehammer to crack a nut by actually over-regulating something that's at its very early stages of development. So, for example, if you create a licensing regime for a lot of things, then people will probably be able to move around it. or it will just affect someone like Dasset. If you guys needed to get a license that was really onerous and had expensive costs and meant that you had to make life more difficult for your customers, then your customers might just start going to using exchanges in other countries around the world, which is not really a great outcome, because that's even less protected for New Zealand investors, because it's actually harder to, if you've got a problem with an exchange outside New Zealand, it's going to be hard for you to actually deal with it just because of the tyranny of distance. Our regulators won't help, basically. Whereas if you deal with someone in New Zealand, you get those protections. So there are lots of things that we need to balance in order to do this effectively. Will we follow what Australia does? Yeah, probably bits of it, but our regime, our general financial services regime, does work differently. So we won't necessarily do things in exactly the same way. When are we going to do something? I don't know when the politicians will get excited enough to do anything. Obviously, there's an election next year and probably a few other things that might be more top of mind.
So Al would like to know, are there any jurisdictions outside of New Zealand which are proposing regulatory framework for crypto, which could make sense for New Zealand to follow?
We'll look closely at what Australia is doing. But they are a larger crypto market, and they are doing some things differently. So for example, they have more exchanges. So a licensing regime for exchanges might make more sense to them. Plus they have this thing called an AFSL, an Australian Financial Services License, which basically any kind of financial services business in Australia needs. Our licensing doesn't really work that way. So we license people that provide certain products to retail investors. So we license fund managers, we license insurers, but we don't license custodians and some other things. So, making a decision to license exchanges, say, would be a decision that puts them as more regulated than some other things. So maybe we wouldn't do that. Also, when there aren't that many exchanges in New Zealand, creating a regime that really only fits sort of one or two entities kind of might be a bit of a waste of time. So maybe there are other ways of doing it. What I think my view is what we should be looking very carefully at the way our financial advice regime works. So perhaps bringing some parts of that into the same regulation as other advisors. So if someone is out there telling people which shares to buy, they should probably be regulated the same way as someone who's out there telling people which cryptos to buy, because it is helping people make investment decisions. So there is an equivalence that maybe is worth regulating. Also be watching quite closely what goes on in the UK and also Europe, because they have been quite sensible about creating regimes that flow through. There's also a guy called Binu Paul, who was the sort of FinTech liaison person with the Financial Markets Authority for a year or two here in New Zealand, who has been poached to go and work at the Financial Conduct Authority as their sort of crypto digital asset lead in the UK. So, we've got a nice sort of bridge to get some learnings, I think, back from that. The US is kind of a much scarier place in terms of the way they've tried to regulate things. The sort of received wisdom is that they have tried to regulate by enforcement rather than guidance. So people over there complain that they don't really know what the rules are until the SEC turns around and says, well, you may not have known what the rules were, but we now think you've broken them, so we're going to actually take you to court and exert penalties on. So that, I don't think, is the approach that we would take in New Zealand, or at least I hope not.
Well, that leads me on to the next question. Jonathan would like to know, what do you think New Zealand should do so we can take advantage of the crypto world?
Yeah, so hopefully our report will get released at some point, and there are dozens of recommendations of things that we could do. Things roughly, I think some light touch regulation for certain behavior to try and sort of protect consumers whilst not stopping them from getting involved, I think is important. Any sort of regulation has to really understand that crypto is not just about speculating and investing and buying stuff because you'll be able to sell it for a higher price, which certainly hasn't necessarily been the case in the last little while. But we do need to protect people, but we also need to understand that fundamentally this is just technology which is going to go underneath the hood in all sorts of contexts. But anything that actually looks like a traditional world product probably will end up being regulated in some of the same way as other traditional products. Other things that I think are really important are education. So that's education of young people at school, education of adults who are just sort of dipping their toes into the space, education of the regulators so that they understand what they're regulating, education of politicians so that when they make rules that are based on the reality, not the headlines. And a lot of that could work around concepts like sandboxes, so if we create environments that people can innovate within, and where they're not prevented by overly onerous rules from doing that, A, that allows people to develop new products, and B, it allows someone like the Financial Markets Authority to work alongside the innovators and learn as they go. So we're really keen on sort of developing those sort of environments, and just having people in government talk to each other in sensible ways. So IRD talking to MB. So if MB is sort of developing proposals to allow for DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations, kind of crypto native corporations or arrangements. If we can develop sort of sensible rules around that, then we also need to understand how they're taxed. So everyone should play together nicely.
Jonathan's also would like to know, what's the level of understanding with crypto at regulator and government level? I mean, that's quite a hard question to answer, but a good one. Are they?
Yeah,
are they educating themselves?
They are definitely. There is definitely a level of understanding, and I would say it sits within a few people in each place, and then they do talk to each other, and they also learn through a lot of the things that we do. So when we work together with a customer that's developing a new product, so let's take someone like, I don't know if you've come across a company called Debut, DBUT, which is a New Zealand startup, which basically offers a kind of a savings product. There's an app you can download, you deposit money, that money is turned into stable coins, which is then invested in a yield earning protocol. You can see it ticking up on the interest payment ticking up on your app. And the way that's designed legally is to fit within a certain type of structure where it's not regulated as a deposit taking exercise, because fundamentally everything's always held on trust for the original investor, kind of like what happens when you put money into your Sharesies account. That remains your money, so you're not taking a credit risk on Sharesies. And when they use that to buy shares, those shares are held by them on trust for you, which is kind of how they do their fractionalization and other things. So this business operated in that way. So in order though, because it kind of looks like putting money in a bank, that was definitely a process where we would go to the FMA, they would convene through what's called the Council of Financial Regulators, a meeting, and this is a service that they offer basically largely through Binu's work when he was there for new fintechs, that they can help you convene a meeting which might have IRD, Reserve Bank of New Zealand, Financial Markets Authority together in one room where you can explain what you're doing, explain how it works, and have lawyers like us saying, well, we understand how the traditional laws apply to this new product. We think it's X, Y, and Z. Tell us if we're wrong. So by doing that sort of thing for lots of new product providers, they learn as they go. So there definitely is a level of both interest and education now, because we've been going to the FMA with these sort of things for 5 or 6 years. So, yeah, they do understand this stuff. Some of them probably own some crypto. Some of them probably don't. People like the Reserve Bank obviously are quite deep, parts of them are quite deeply into this because they have a product under development for a central bank digital currency. And they've published various papers on that, because for them it's about what they do is they regulate the supply of money, and part of money is moving into digital forms of money, and so they're quite interested in developing those categories. So yeah, there's definitely knowledge there, but there's also lots of people still to bring on the journey.
Yeah, we're still very much in the early stages, aren't we?
Yeah. There's a good quote that I often pull out in these things from Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist who has invested quite heavily through Andreessen Horowitz, big VC firm in the US, in the sort of crypto blockchain space. And he just says, we're investing in this space because we see it as a genuine new technological innovation. It's the other half of the internet that we didn't know how to build when we built the first half. And it's on a 20 to 30 year trajectory. So, this is still early days.
I have a question, Jeremy. Have you ever come across, as a lawyer, someone passing away and they've got a lot of crypto, say they've lost their recovery phrase, or does it then get, say they haven't written it in their will, for example? What would happen?
Yeah, that's a problem, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's not my core area, but I've had plenty of conversations about it, and I know our wills and estates people are aware of it and thinking about it. And this is kind of it reflects how early we are in this business. That a lot of the systems are still designed by technology people rather than by user experience people. So a lot of this stuff still isn't user friendly, and some of the things which actually are some of the features of it and add to the security of it do make it easy to potentially lose your crypto if you lose your passphrase, or your computer crashes, or you lose the hard drive, or you don't have the piece of paper where it's written down on. We've all heard stories about the laptop in the garbage dump somewhere in Scotland or in the UK, where somewhere in there's a laptop with so many Bitcoin on it that it's worth millions and millions of dollars. These are real issues, and if someone dies and you haven't made a suitable arrangement for someone else to be able to access that crypto, then it's probably lost. So what you do need to think pragmatically about how you're going to arrange it. And I know that there are some businesses that are being developed. There's a company called Everlasting, I think, in New Zealand, which is looking at it, where they're basically trying to design systems that will be death-proof, if you want to put it that way. And the way you would do that is by having ownership of the private, or control of the private keys, split on a sort of multi-sig basis, where you might have 3 people who actually have access to the crypto, and you need any 2 of them in order to actually pull it out or make a transaction. And while you're alive, that might be you and the service provider or your accountant or something like that. And then you might also have your lawyer who has another signatory control. So then if you die, there are still 2 people who can actually pull it out. And then if you've provided in your will that your crypto is to go to your family or otherwise, then the executor of the will, if the instructions have been recorded together with the will then be able to execute that and pull it back out. So that's, it doesn't have to be any 2 or 3 people. You could pass over or record the details in a way that with instructions that allow someone to access it. But obviously, as you know, anyone who can control, who has the passcode, the keys, you know, can actually pull it out and do something. So you need to think about what is the security, who do you trust, how do you manage it? So great, yeah, it's a great question, and things are being evolved, but there isn't sort of any one solution yet. But watch this space.
Yes, absolutely.
And definitely talk to your lawyers about it, and if they want to talk to lawyers who understand crypto, then they can come and talk to us.
Great. And what about yourself, Jeremy? Can you tell us a little bit, have you got, what do you invest in?
What do I invest in? To a
Yeah.
degree, you know, I have crypto, but I'm also very much a hodler, in that I haven't really been ever a seller.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a trader by heart. In this space, I'm the guy who sells pickaxes to the gold miners. So a service provider to the industry. But I do have some investments which are largely in some of the obvious coins. So Bitcoin, I've got some Ripple and some Stellar Lumens there. I don't think I've got anything which has completely disappeared. I've got a glorious founder membership to get access to sort of NFTs through that. I've got a couple of other NFTs that I bought on OpenSea at whatever price I felt I could afford at the time. I've given up on a couple of occasions there where the gas fees were going to be more than I was prepared to pay for the actual NFTs. So, you know, all the usual stuff. I'm also, because I work very heavily in the sort of venture and startup space, my sort of personal family, my wife and I have invested quite a lot in startups and venture. So while on the other hand, we're kind of quite conservative, let's pay down our mortgage types as well. So we have definitely the barbell approach to investment, which is conservative, paying down debt, highly risky startups in there. So adding an extra sort of layer of speculation in coins on top of that, I kind of feel it would take up too much of my time and mental energy. But I applaud those who are deeply engaged in sort of reading the tea leaves and understanding which way the markets moves.
Yes, it could definitely be a full-time job, that's for sure. There's a lot to learn. Wonderful. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Not as yet.
Let's see if I can think of some other war stories. You got a question?
No, not quite a question. No, just a statement.
Maybe a rude comment.
No, not at all.
So one interesting thing we did do in this space, actually with our sort of techie friends, was for a company called Techamint. And to some asset investors, you will come across this, which was actually helping to design the New Zealand dollar stablecoin, the NZDS. And that actually was quite a legal challenge because we were trying to create a coin, a token that was linked to the New Zealand dollar and sort of carried the same value, whilst avoiding some of the pitfalls that other stable coins have fallen into overseas. So obviously algorithmic stable coins, which aren't sort of fully collateralized, have had a bit of a bad rap since Terra Luna, and that ecosystem managed to destroy sort of billions of dollars in value. Actually, pretty much while I was in Texas at the Consensus conference this year around, lots of people with sad faces, lots of people who didn't really care as well, but that's probably another story. So it also had to meet certain legal tests in that, as I've sort of alluded to before, the coin we designed couldn't be a financial product, because if it was, you wouldn't be able to list it on DASET for a start, because it would mean DASET would need a license, which it does not have, and which would be, you know, very onerous and time consuming to get, and isn't really designed for crypto at all. So part of the way that that was designed was through using a trust mechanism, kind of in the way that we do for debut as well, similar sort of model. So when you or an issuer or a market maker buys a New Zealand dollar stable coin, or actually to enable the minting of a coin, a dollar is deposited in a bank account, and that dollar then triggers the minting of the one NZDS. But the dollar in the bank account is held on a trust for the person who deposited it and who now holds the NZDS coin. And that coin, when it then starts to circulate, so it gets listed on the exchange or someone buys it through Dasset, the holder of that coin is now entitled to the trust interest in the coin, in the dollar, in the bank account. And by doing it that way, it's not treated as a debt security, therefore a financial product, because you're not taking a credit risk on the underlying person. So it's not like a bank where if you give $1 to the bank, it now belongs to the bank and they owe you $1 back. So that's why they can then take that dollar and go and lend it to someone who wants to buy a house. So you are taking a credit risk on the bank or a finance company if you do that. Theoretically, the way this works is as long as that dollar stays in the bank account, if the Techament entity that actually issues the tokens became insolvent, though that money would still be held on trust and therefore protected from other creditors. So by designing it that way, we worked our way around those sort of financial product rules. On the other hand, we also need to comply with anti-money laundering rules, which is why if you actually ever want to get the dollar back, you would have to actually sign up as a customer effectively of Techament, be verified for AML purposes before you can actually get the dollar back. But if you just buy the dollar in the wild, buy the NZDS in the wild, you don't have to be verified for that purpose by Techament, because there isn't a customer relationship there. Obviously, if you're buying it through Dasset, you've hopefully been verified through that process.
Absolutely.
So that was something that, plus all the tax issues around if you suddenly mint a whole lot of tokens, which are effectively worth $10 million, is that suddenly something that someone has to pay tax on? Obviously required quite a lot of design work to make sure it was structured in the most efficient and compliant way. And again, which then was discussed with regulators and others at the time. The RBNZ obviously having a particular interest in things which look like and smell like legal tender.
So we have a couple of other questions. Al would like to know, do you see a fully collateralized stablecoin like NZDS living alongside a future NZ CBDC?
Yeah, great question. I mean, sometimes when I've done presentations to banks and other institutions, I have a couple of slides around the battle for money in future, because I think we're actually moving towards a very interesting environment where there are going to be many different ways to pay for stuff. And that's not even just the rails on which value moves, but actually what you pay with. So obviously there's normal fiat money, which could be either in the form of dollars and cents, cash, or electronic money, which moves through banks, but is still New Zealand fiat currency effectively. Then you can have privately issued New Zealand dollar fully collateralized stable coins like the NZDS. But equally, the Reserve Bank is looking at a retail central bank digital currency, which would potentially could be blockchain based, tokenized, and move on those sort of same rails. So it could be listed on an exchange, or more likely you would be able to have a wallet effectively relationship directly with the Reserve Bank. So you could hold your New Zealand dollar central bank digital currency in your wallet and use that to make payments or otherwise without having to use a bank. So yes, they kind of do the same thing, but you can sort of look at who you trust, or you'd need to look closely at the design. So one of the design issues for a central bank digital currency is, will they be tempted to make that money programmable or otherwise subject to monitoring or surveillance in a way that maybe a private stablecoin isn't. And then the other categories which are interesting are, will we see sort of big tech come in and launch a currency which will compete as a kind of either pegged to a local currency or as an attempted global currency. So a couple of years ago we had Facebook and friends, they were trying to very much create a coalition, come out with their design for a coin that was to be called Libra, which would be backed by a basket, collateralized basket of other global currencies and other assets, and would be a sort of form of value that people could buy stuff with online through Facebook markets and other things. And that was considered to be so threatening to governments who don't want to be out-competed in the money supply. Because if you are the Reserve Bank or a central bank around the world, you want control over money, because that's how you execute monetary policy, which is how you change interest rates and other things. If no one's using your currency anymore, then you lose control of those levers. So politics and finance gets trickier. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, depends on whether you're a sort of liberal anarchist or otherwise. There are lots of different ways that you can look at it. But those governments were so concerned about the Facebook Libra project that they effectively could lean on it and shut it down. And it still exists as DM in a sort of perpetually in development, much smaller sort of way. But that was a good example of big tech trying to do this, and not succeeding. But you've got to say that, maybe Apple could try something, or one of the other sort of big tech companies that actually comes out. So you're going to have all of these different competing forms of value. And the other one that I sort of look at and think about in a sort of a future paradise sort of way in the metaverse is, maybe we won't need money at all. There'll just be sort of value which is locked in the NFTs that you own, whether they're your branded Nike sneakers or your property in the metaverse, and actually everything can seamlessly sort of almost barter exchange for otherwise. So yeah, lots of good future gazing to be had there. So what I would say is, in terms of a straight comparison between NZDS and a New Zealand dollar central bank digital currency, I think they could be swappable and serve the same purpose, which is probably would mean that NZDS is less appealing because maybe there's more trust in the government. Some people don't have that level of trust in the government, so they might have more trust in NZDS. But I think the important thing would be looking at exactly what the CBDC looks like, how you use it, who controls it, who monitors it, who surveils it. Yeah, and it may well be that they are something you can choose between.
We'll take one last question from Jonathan. Jonathan, and this is a great question. What sort of other interesting products do you see out there that could work in New Zealand, especially since you're supporting startups? Is there anything in general that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of interesting things going on. There is a lot in that whole sort of DeFi, lending pools, yield earning type of environment, which I think is very interesting, and we will see more of. So tokenized services generally, loyalty schemes, tickets, fan tokens, really, some really cool stuff happening there. Basically, where you can have something which has elements of a voucher or a currency, but equally can show that you're a member of a specific group and might unlock certain services. That stuff's pretty cool. I'm really excited by NFTs and things as a way of maybe rewarding creators, whether they're artists or musicians. So there's some really interesting things going on with actually, if you sell your music in a way using NFTs that can then be sort of traded ultimately, and actually has a sort of a smart contract built-in return to the provider. There could be new models for things like Spotify and other players which are maybe less centralized and corporatized and more sort of creator friendly. Do keep a close eye on the Futureverse family. So that's Fluff World, all of those sort of companies coming out of New Zealand. That whole project is definitely going places, and I think you'll see some really interesting stuff come out in the next little while. Yeah, but it's kind of, if you live in this space long enough, you see that it's a way of thinking that almost anything that we do in this world, there may be a way of using decentralized means to do it. So, which is not to say that you should, and it's not the answer to everything, and a lot of products or ideas will sort of be trialed and then discarded, but yeah, lots of interesting stuff.
Thank you, Jeremy. If any of our audience would like to use your services and get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Look, you can find me through Google. So Jeremy Muir at MinterEllison. The website there has contact details. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn.
Great.
So you can definitely find me there. Yeah, some of the others, Twitters and Discords and Telegram and things I exist on, but I don't quite have the mental bandwidth to make my way around all of them. So probably directly or via LinkedIn is probably the best way to follow. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I do post quite a lot of interesting stuff in this space, or things that I come across and find interesting, and commentary on New Zealand developments is probably the most efficient way to get that. Oh,
that's perfect. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. Keep up the good work, everyone, and be careful out there, investors.
Yes.
But hey, it's all coming around again. It's
been
declared, crypto's been declared dead in the time I've been here more times than, if you actually look up some of the articles, it's quite hilarious as to how many times it is the death knell has been struck. But
it's not going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere because it's just technology, and it's just different ways of doing the things that humans like to do.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Cool.
Everyone have a good afternoon.
Yes, absolutely. Bye-bye.